I will say a few words about sustainability and then something about the applications and also benefits, disadvantages, and little bit about biofuel properties. There is a lot of material available online and also in the course articles and course book about sustainability in context of biofuels and biofuel production. And the sustainability is not only about positive things, so there are concerns about certain issues or problems related with sustainability when talking about biofuels, their production and raw material processing, collection, transportation, and such kind of things. I have here also certain links, and the idea is that you, if needed, so you can glance the web pages or materials behind the links, so that I will not explain every single detail here during these lectures. Here is just a screenshot or from a Nature article. So basically there are just the headlines that there are some some problems related to biofuel sustainability as well. So I'll raise some of these aspects in a coming slides, but there's also possibility to have carbon-free energy or renewable energy that doesn't utilize the carbon as the energy source. So, but on this course we focus on biofuels, and biofuels are made from biomass which contains carbon. So once biofuels are burned or combusted for energy, so the evident outcome will be then carbon dioxide emissions from that renewable source. So we cannot avoid CO2 emissions, but these are considered sustainable, much better alternative than burning fossil fuels. This was question also asked in one of the few first lectures. So when we are burning or using biofuels and producing carbon dioxide, so does the use of these fuels really help to tackle the greenhouse gas emissions, global warming, and eventually reduce CO2 levels in the atmosphere? And this is there's not really a very simple yes or no answer. The problem is more multidimensional and complex. So it's not only the primary emissions coming out from the tailpipe, but to get reliable answers, one needs to carry out life cycle assessments, environmental impact assessments, and such kind of calculations that take the bigger picture into account. So there aren't easy yes or no answers. This table I took from one of the course materials, and it's quite a recent publication from early this year. And one advice is that if you want to understand it in depth, so of course you would take a look at the original reference or the original publications where this, let's say, conclusions or small details have been taken. So, however, this is based on LCA, so life cycle assessment calculations and evaluations, and bioethanol, biodiesel, biomass to liquid, biomethane, and also hydrogen results have been collected in this particular table. And what I wanted to visualize and emphasize with this material is that basically in all of these calculations, the result was that the bio-based fuels are resulting in greenhouse gas savings or lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to fossil-based alternatives. So this is, of course, the foundation of why the biofuels are used, and especially in order to reduce or compensate the use of fossil-based raw materials, what we have been going through just a while ago. So crude oil, petroleum, natural gas, and coal can be replaced by using these renewable biofuels. This picture I showed you on Monday, and I just wanted to refresh your memory in that sense that there are like we talk about different generations of biofuels, and we went through this slightly on Monday. And what is meant by the first generation biofuels, so is meant that the bio component or the biomass is actually edible biomass. So in other terms, it's human or animal food, and generally that's considered unsustainable raw material. So there is so-called food versus fuel debate or conflict. So to what extent we should convert edible food ingredients to fuel and sustain our excessive use of fuels for traveling and for energy. So that is not considered sustainable, and it was already 20 years back quite clear that one should prefer these second generation or higher generation biofuels over the first generation ones. And here are some negative impacts that the first generation approach can cause greenhouse gas emissions, reduce biodiversity, influence the land use, also increase water use, and promote water pollution and excessive use of fertilizers, of course, can result into eutrophication and many other problems. But generally, the first generation biofuels can also result in these, like mentioned in this slide, so lower greenhouse gas emissions, but with this, I want to just highlight that sustainability is much more than just the greenhouse gas emissions and much more than only carbon dioxide emissions. The advantage of this first generation biofuels is clearly here that these are usually established and quite simple processes, and it doesn't require intensive pre-treatment for the biomass material. So these are quite easy to make. So if we talk about bioethanol that has been made from sugars, from edible materials already like thousands of years. So we have made alcohol, ethanol beverages and so on, and the process is quite well understood and works well. But the challenge here is that leave these edible materials to humans and animals and then try to move more towards non-edible materials as the biomass source. And we'll tackle this more in the waste to fuels course, but there are also like biomass components that are not edible, like parts of that plant that usually are not eaten, like the peel or the stem or some roots or branches of that plant. So then also there are biomass or plants that are not edible because they are certain type like grass or toxic or poisonous to us humans, but they can have a very good composition in thinking about, for example, fermentation or this making of biodiesel, bioethanol, and such kind of fuels. I will not go into this third and fourth generation biofuels here in detail, but these are basically different technological or those are like technologically on a different level. But second generation is more or less like it says here. So it's woody biomass, lignocellulosic biomass, which is as such not really edible. Humans cannot digest wood. Certain animals can, and also microbes can, but not humans. And in addition to woody biomass, also different residues, leftover parts, organic waste and such kind of materials are considered in this to be more sustainable and better alternatives. Here's the similar first, second, third generation categories, just from a different source, different publication. Second generation raw materials are here specified like lignocellulosic biomass. Next time we'll take a look at the chemical composition and also molecular structures of different biomass types and their potential in biofuel production. Typically it's bioethanol and like mentioned here, some gasification, pyrolysis and such type of activities that are in the second generation biofuel category. I've tried to put in this slide some kind of in context to sustainability. So just to try to approach it so that it's like mentioned, so it's much more than carbon dioxide emission, much more than greenhouse gas emissions. And even if we think about this upper right corner picture here, which tells like a simplified view of biofuel life cycle emissions. So the emissions are majority are this carbon dioxide, but there are other pollutants and emissions. But here is like the different life cycle steps. So there is the biomass plantation or growth and the harvesting and emissions and energy consumption related to that. There can be a lot of transportation from one place to another. It can be fertilizers on the field or spreading the fertilizers and seeds on the fields, for example, transporting the crops to certain production facility or processing facility that might not be the same place where the actual biofuel is made. Also, the biofuel production is a multi-step procedure. It often contains, like mentioned, pre-treatment steps where the biomass is made more readily accessible to the actual biofuel production. And the production often is not 100% selective, and the conversion is not 100%. So you end up with mixtures of unreacted starting materials, side products, and also hopefully majority will be the desired biofuel component. But depending the state of the matter, if it's liquid, gaseous, or even mixture of those and solid materials, so you need certain separation steps. And even when dealing with as simple as bioethanol, so you need separation or purification steps. These are in that case they mean the same thing, so that you end up with ethanol water mixture, and that is not fuel as such. You need to remove the water, and that's done in not in single step, but usually in several steps by distillation and by also other ways of removing the water from that mixture. Once you have that biofuel component, so you'll usually store it somewhere, maybe you transport it elsewhere, and sooner or later it will end up as a biocomponent in the fuel, or it will be used as such. Very often it's just one ingredient in the fuel mixture. Then it's placed in the distribution network and stored somewhere, perhaps later on used by us, and so on. And this is just about the life cycle of that, or the sustainability issues and life cycle around that actual biofuel. But it also influences in wider sense, like farmers and communities, rural areas. This is global business, so different components can be made in different countries or different continents, and the ingredients are moving from place to place and so on. When dealing with plant material, so very often you need certain type of fertilizers and things. Those are often not coming locally, but can be made from other side of the planet and so on. So if you start to take all these effects into account, so it's not always self-evident which biofuel or which process is the most sustainable one, and it becomes quite complicated. What is or what should be quite clear is that biofuels offer reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and help to substitute or replace some of the fossil feedstocks used in fuel production. That is the starting point, mentioned already a few times today. There are these sustainability concerns related to, for example, particularly these first generation biofuels, so competition with food production. So there is still lack of food and malnutrition in the planet. In quite many places, there is much more need for food and nutrition than for fuels. And then it's a question that will it happen with the expense of food production? So will the fields and land be used for making fuel ingredients instead of making food? And like always in related to agriculture activities or growing of biomass, so tends to be so that you need irrigation and you have to use quite a lot of water, and this might cause problems in that local community. So if large companies are using excessive amounts of water just to make fuels, will the local community get water for other activities, like for drinking and washing and so on? That's just an example. Also, often the biomass growth requires like other resources, not only water, nutrition, maybe some farming equipment, some soil improvement components, and so on. There is also concern that when, for example, these forests are cut down and converted into farmland or fields, so maybe some of the carbon storage will be destroyed in that same process. Same happens if forest and rainforests are cut down for biofuel or biomass production. So maybe it's quite clear that biodiversity is at stake. There are quite bad examples, at least in South America, related to this, that the Amazonian rainforests are quite decreasing very rapidly because of, for example, farming, because of meat production, because of growing of this different biofuel components. So the sustainability takes into account different aspects, or at least it tries to take so. Often it's so, like in this case here, so the intensive modern farming or intensive modern production methods, so those tend to have as such negative effects because they aim for very high productivity, very high efficiency. So it results often in adverse negative effects, and that can cause, for example, soil erosion, lack of water. If there's too much irrigation needed, or all the groundwater resources are cut dry. Very often these plants grow faster in the absence of pesticides and insects and things like that. So those are handled often with or cause pollution also in the environment. This was already mentioned, but like at least plant growth is much higher when one uses fossil and nitrogen-based fertilizers, and usually when combined with water-soluble fertilizers with irrigation, soil erosion, so you end up spreading those nutrients further than just on the field area where you grow the crops. So that causes eutrophication in the nearby water bodies like rivers, streams, lakes, and eventually at sea as well. I don't know if you have been following this palm oil discussion. It was quite active some 10-15 years ago here in Finland, because we have one of the world leaders, Neste. It's Finnish, originally Finnish company that makes this hydrotreated vegetable oil, so HVO diesel, that is very high quality, and the key ingredient used to be palm oil, like the raw material. And like it says here, it's one of the cheapest sources of vegetable oil, and it's quite widely used in food industry, making of cosmetics, and also making of these fuel components or the renewable diesel. And the palm oil is at least what I'm not expert in that sense, but it's, for example, grown in somewhere in Malaysia, and because there used to be very high demand, so of course the locals tried to increase the farming area for these palms and making of that oil, and it was because of at the expense of local forests and local farmers and so on, and cost problems. And this raised a lot of questions that is this really sustainable, or is the diesel made from palm oil really sustainable? And the answer was that there were a lot of problems and issues related to that, and it was clearly not very sustainable. And later on, a lot of improvements were made so that let's say certification and legislation was developed so that this is not anymore such a dramatic issue. Also, the local Finnish company Neste is trying to cut down the use of palm oil. They aim to use all sorts of waste material instead of palm oil in their production. Land use changes, so this was mentioned already slightly earlier, but but it can result, like once the land is used for growing of energy crops instead of food crops, so it can influence the local farmers, it can influence the local conditions quite a lot, and this raises some concern. And also often it's so that if the farming land is taken from local forests and cut down the trees or rainforests or otherwise the local habitats for animals and plants, so this is nowadays quite a big concern, the reduced biodiversity. So often the modern methods that we use for making efficiently our food or our fuel ingredients, so means that the farming is not taking the other plants, other animals much into account. But that's probably something that you have heard quite many times already. And this was also something that I slightly mentioned earlier, but if you think this picture is not really related to this particular issue that much, but it looks nice, and it looks so that it's man-made cultivation. It's not really nature-made farm in the picture. But what happens is that if we want, the idea here behind is that if I didn't put any numbers, but you can think how much oil, crude oil or petroleum we at the moment use. And if we want to replace all that with biomaterial, so I think the Earth's surface is not enough to compensate even half of that oil use or the volumes. So the thing is that this we don't have enough biomass probably to compensate the fossil fuel use. Therefore, we need a broader spectrum of renewable and alternative energy sources. But that's not the other point here is that by selecting the processes and by optimizing the type of plants to that local environment so that you can maximize the crops and the yields, so that becomes quite important, because you of course want to take the maximum out from that land area. Here are just some examples that these oilseed crops, so if you make rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, and such kind of edible oils, so the plants can make few tons of oil per hectare per once a year. So it's not very much if you compare it with the actual oil use. Then the sugar and starch crops. So the oilseed oils can be used to make this FAME, fatty acid methyl esters, or those could be converted to these HVOs as well. But if we deal with sugar and starch crops, so that those can be converted into, for example, into ethanol-based materials. So those have already much higher crops possibility on that same area. And then if it goes to extending it to woody plants and also some bark and other parts which are not used for example for human nutrition, so the productivity can be even higher. So we have lots of these actual numbers in the course book and materials, what the productivities can be. Here you'll see that here are some different oil producing plants or materials, and the species that make these sunflower, soybean, corn oil, rapeseed oil, and such kind of things. So just to have some actual numbers, so here is like the yields per hectare, and there are quite some differences. So certain species produce much higher yields than the others. And then it's of course that why not to choose the maximum yields. Of course, the local conditions might limit that. So the same plants that grow in Finland will not flourish, for example, maybe in Italy or Middle East. So because the local conditions can be very different. And then it's not only the seeds or plant yields, it's also question that how much you can extract the actual oil out from those. That can also vary quite a lot. This food versus fuel we addressed to some extent already, but it's not that easy maybe to answer that. And now that we are in the global world, so it's not always visible to us where the fuel comes from. So it can be that it's made out of seeds and oil in Malaysia or some parts of Africa or Australia where you have never been, so it's not visible to you. Also the production and processing can take place in other countries, so it's not easy to see. But the question is how to prioritize. So do we need in Europe, when we don't have malnutrition and lack of food usually, so is it correct that we use the food from other countries and they suffer perhaps from malnutrition, but well, you'll understand probably the point here. I have been complaining so much or putting these negative effects or highlighting those, that there are also like benefits in the biofuel sector, and this I took some benefits that societal benefits in Europe, and one thing is that if we use local biomass reserves, local bio-waste reserves, so we reduce the dependency on fossil fuels. And like said, and you know also the Europe doesn't have very many fossil fuel reserves. So then like if we can use our own production and raw materials, so that's clearly a positive thing. If there are more fuel possibilities, more sources, more alternatives, so this would also make prices more stable, more predictable, not so susceptible to different problems or speculations of production problems, or even this war and political unrest. So Europe has been quite stable, but most of the fossil fuels come outside of Europe, from Middle East and from Russia. And therefore, if we can avoid that, we increase our energy stability, and the prices are also easier to predict, at least. Europe can reduce greenhouse gas emissions with the use of biofuels. And it's not only Europe, it's of course elsewhere as well. So that was kind of a general conclusion that by using biofuels, so you have possibility to reduce these emissions. Once we get our processes and raw materials from Europe, so we of course generate locally jobs and wealth, and also we have possibility to develop maybe underdeveloped areas, rural areas and such in Europe. One possibility is that we focus on conversion of these waste and side streams that exist already in Europe. So we have food waste, we have forestry waste from agriculture, we have side streams and waste that can be converted into fuels. So it would make sense that use those locally in Europe instead of buying fossil fuels from outside of Europe. And the last point here was to also if thinking about this slightly unstable times, so we should be independent in terms of important key raw materials and ingredients, and fuels and energy supply is one of those. So if we have our own production, our own raw materials, so that would help the, let's say, or lower the dependency on others. Just a few more slides and then I'll have a short break. But said too many of these, let's say, negative aspects or unsustainable dimensions of this biofuel boom, biofuel production. So there is a need to improve things, make this whole production and more sustainable. And here are a few points if you want to ensure the socio-economic sustainability and taking the whole life cycle or supply chain into account. So it has to take into account the land use, wherever the biomass is grown and harvested. Also the agricultural practices, so that those will cause minimum harm and produce maximum yield and effectiveness in terms of this production process. Also what we mentioned, the competition with food is something that has to be considered. So it might not be visible locally in Europe, but it might be very challenging problem in Malaysia or elsewhere where these big volumes of biomasses are produced. Other things to consider are energy efficiency, also the greenhouse gas emissions, and how this can be done. It's in a scientific way. It's to make it properly using life cycle analysis of these production chains or processes. So this can be done. This life cycle analysis has been standardized and there are methods and databases available. So it's not something that is a matter of opinion, but it's a scientific method and it helps to evaluate the sustainability and also the environmental impacts of different processes and so on. Also, Europe has been forerunner in the sustainability and renewable fuels sector, and they want to take these problems seriously and make all this more sustainable and better for the environment as well. And one solution has been the Renewable Energy Directive. Here we don't go into details, but there are things that help to increase sustainability of this biofuel production activities and related to, for example, these land use, agricultural practice, and so on. So that was something about sustainability. And if you don't remember anything else, so at least keep in mind that it's a multidimensional challenge. So it's not easy to evaluate. If you want to carry out life cycle analysis, life cycle assessments, that is not, or it's very time consuming. So it's not that easy to provide answers that which, if you have alternatives, so which alternative is the best. And very often it's so that some alternatives are good for certain things and the other alternatives do better different things. So it's not always easy to decide what is the most sustainable way of doing these things. So we can continue with today's theory. And next I'll present some applications related to these biofuels. And first of all, methanol. So that was presented last time as one of the fuel alcohols that are produced in quite large amounts. It's one of the most largest volume produced chemical in the world, methanol. At least it's in the top 5 of most produced chemicals. And methanol has many uses in addition to fuel use. So for making of certain basic chemicals like here formaldehyde and acetic acid and so on. Also the methanol as such, it can be used as fuel, as we discussed last time. So, and also it can be used, methanol can be starting material in making fuel additives like methyl terbutyl ether and so on. So these additives that can be put in the petrol to improve the certain characteristics of the fuel so that it meets the fuel standards and so on. Methanol is mostly made from fossil sources. However, it can of course be made from biomass and biomaterial. And very often when I talk during the course like biomethanol, methanol, and so on. So keep in mind that like from chemistry point of view and from application point of view, so it doesn't matter. 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 So if the origin is fossil or if the origin is bio. So the actual chemical is basically the same, apart from the isotopic carbon-14 isotope concentration. So otherwise there is no difference, and in chemistry, in combustion characteristics and everything else, so is the same. The same applies to bioethanol and and ethanol. So regardless of bio or not, so it behaves the same way when it's used for the most common applications. Biomethanol, according to some of these sources, so methanol can be blended in a normal petrol, so it can be used as a bioadditive in a similar way as bioethanol can be added into petrol. So this works in a similar way. I found out in some of these articles that in China this methanol additives are used also and mixed with petrol blends. In Finland, I'm not aware that methanol would be added to petrol, but at least it's not advertised. Ethanol is used, so it's like E95 E10 instead of 95 M10 grade of the fuel. So it's an important basic chemical, and it has applications in the fuel sector as well. Then another important area can be this shipping industry. So if you are interested in finding more about methanol properties and how it suits for example, ships and so on, here's quite a lot of information, and it can reduce pollutants in the shipping industry quite a lot. If you remember, so regular ships use the lowest and cheapest grades of fuels for their engines, for the diesel engines. And the diesel engines can be modified so that it runs also with methanol. And of course, when the methanol is of bio origin from biomass, so it can offer these improvements in greenhouse gas emissions, and also it can reduce compared to that normal fuels, so it can reduce NOx, SOx and particulate emissions, which are those pollutants that we went through already earlier. Methanol has certain benefits, like here it's mentioned that it's easy to store and handle. So that's, of course, it's at room temperature liquid, and liquids are often quite easy to handle and store and so on. Also, it can be retrofitted, or not retro, but fitted with the common diesel engines in ships. What else can be? The same thing applies to hydrogen as well. So it's like mentioned, so the methanol is methanol like for chemists, so there is not a difference, but of course it depends if it's made from renewable sources or some other methods, so it can get this additional color attached to it, so blue or green, gray, brown methanol alternatives. So about the environmental effects, here you'll see that there are notable emission cuts if you use methanol instead of this bunker oil or heavy fuel oil that are common in ships or shipping industry. I think here was mentioned the cost also. So this is something to keep in mind. So compared to diesel operation, fuel expenses with methanol can be up to 15 times higher, depending on the type of the methanol. So it's notably expensive than running the old traditional fuels, diesel fuels in the ships. And this is much higher than many of the bioethanol and fuel alternatives, but in any case, so cost is always a factor, and sometimes the benefits are higher than the cost expensive prices. So that's something again that it depends on many things which is preferred. But this was just a link to some material that highlights that methanol as a fuel, it can be used instead of in gasoline driven vehicles to blend petrol, so use as an additive there, and it works well, but it can also be used as such as 100% pure methanol in diesel engines with some modifications in ships. Bioethanol, so methanol has one carbon in the molecule. Ethanol has two carbons in the molecule, so it's alcohol, but slightly longer chain one. And this is very commonly used in petrol additives. So we have addressed this already multiple times so far. So in Europe, we have these E5 and E10 grades of petrol, and also E85 and some other alternatives where the ethanol is added as a biocomponent, basically. It also can improve some combustion characteristics of the fuel, but so it's as such an additive, and it's also quite important raw material for making this fuel additive, ethyl tert butyl ether. So this we also addressed or touched previously already. United States has lots of maize production, and from that you can make or they'll make ethanol, and that ends up as a biocomponent in petrol. Brazil has been using, they have this sugar production, sugar cane and for example as raw materials, and they have also been using already tens of years like high concentrations of ethanol in petrol, and these two, United States and Brazil, are the largest producers of bioethanol, and also they use quite a lot of it themselves. It's not all going to export. This was mentioned last time as a biofuel, but like the ethanol and methanol, so this ethyl tert-butyl ether is an additive or blending agent, so it's not usually used 100% pure, but it's added into fuel in order to improve the combustion. It brings oxygen. It's an ether. Ether contains oxygen molecules, so it brings oxygen, increases the oxygen in the combustion process. But I guess that's the application side of it. So I don't know if it's, as the main application is to be blended in petrol or gasoline, depending which American or British English you prefer to use. I tried to search for some applications for the butanol. That's even longer chain alcohol, so this contains 4 carbon atoms, and this resembles more hydrocarbons used in petrol because it has the longer hydrocarbon chain. We'll take a look at these structures still later, perhaps. But butanol is closer to gasoline than, for example, ethanol or methanol, and therefore it can be used blended in gasoline so that it's the main component. So 85% butanol, 15% gasoline can be used in regular petrol engines. This slide you already saw last time, but otherwise I tried to look for material related to butanol and its use and or production volumes, and I couldn't easily find it, so I don't have really numbers. I came across that there are certain standards for butanol isomers in United States related to fuel applications, but I don't know how's the situation in Europe at the moment. Something that should be studied maybe more in depth. But the economic importance of this is clearly less than for ethanol and methanol and these ETBE additives. Then fourth biocomponent of biofuel is this FAME biodiesel, so the traditional like first generation biofuel made out of this edible oils, or it can also be waste vegetable oils. But this is something that is again used as a biocomponent or blending agent. So seldom this is used as such, because in modern diesel engines it requires modification. It's not very high quality fuel, 100% pure FAME, but it works reasonably well if the concentration of this component is kept rather low. EU has set the limit to 7% by volume for this fatty acid methyl ester component or additive in the diesel. But otherwise, I don't see any reasonable use for this. So it's used as a biocomponent, and that's where the main larger volumes are going with this particular fuel. And then if we take a step further, more advanced diesel. So this is so-called renewable diesel, and the acronym HVO comes from hydrogenated or hydrotreated vegetable oils. And in addition to biodiesel, instead of calling it biodiesel, so it's called a renewable diesel. And there is a huge difference in all aspects. There is maybe there is more or less very little in common, except that they both can be used in diesel engines. But this is much higher quality fuel, and it's also available in pure components. So Neste is selling this HVO 100, meaning that there is only this renewable diesel in that particular product. Also, Finnish operating company, or in Finland, the UPM is producing similar Bioferno diesel with that similar technology. So the renewable diesel or hydrotreated vegetable oil it's a commercial product that you can buy in, at least in Finland, but it's produced also in Rotterdam refinery and in Malaysia, in Singapore at least. So it's completely made out of waste and biomass components. So, and the good thing with this is that it's comparable to fossil-based diesel fuel, or it can be even better in terms of quality. So it's not any compromise to use this. This can be used pure, so it doesn't have the blending problem like that FAME. So FAME was needed usually exclusively used as a blending agent and in minor quantities, but this doesn't have that problem. Neste is making this HVO from, previously they used that palm oil, and like mentioned today, so they want to get reduce the amount of palm oil and use alternative sources. So they use all sorts of fats and oils coming from slaughterhouses, from alimentary industry, waste oils, whatever that is side product or waste product. So they have technology to convert that into this particular product. And UPM is a traditionally pulp and paper industry. So they have developed based on technically to similar process, but they use I think this now I'm trying to figure out the name of it's a wood-based, it's tall oil. So they from pulp and paper processes you have a side product called tall oil, and that can be converted with this technology to renewable diesel. But this technology is already, there are certainly other manufacturers that make similar this HVO grade diesel products from different renewable starting materials. So these are not the only two. But the application is of course like in the picture, so it suits very well for passenger cars, but like we discussed earlier, so it's difficult to replace this heavy traffic, so trucks and heavy machinery with any other than liquid fuels. So here it's a very nice alternative that this type of renewable diesel is available for trucks and for goods transportation. Then this is the oldest biofuel, has been used already for, I don't know, from thousands of years. So vegetable oils. So vegetable oils can be used as fuel, so you can burn it. It produces energy, and like last time mentioned, so some diesel engines can be modified so that you can use straight vegetable oils or pure vegetable oils, but this is a marginal product, or it's not a very high volume application. I took this from the material that if you take into account some decentralized small scale productions, so these are this can be used like in agriculture or private vehicles as a fuel, but generally the fatty acid methyl ester is added to diesel as a blending agent, as mentioned, or if you want to be greener, you can pump your vehicle with HVO products, which are much higher quality and also are not competing with, let's say, with this food production like this pure vegetable oils could be. Then, of course, if you utilize this waste vegetable oils, so that is, it's not then considered as the first generation fuel, but for example, this HVO production that I showed, so it's a large scale commercial operation and production facilities, and of course Neste and UPM and other HVO producers are hunting for these waste oils, waste vegetable fats, and such kind of things that they can utilize in their processes. So I think this is not, it's a niche application, but just good to know that. Then we had still few types of fuels that we go through their application, and Fischer-Tropsch liquids or biomass to liquids. So that we glanced through on Monday already, and have to say that this technology, so it can produce biomass and it can make petrol components, diesel components, so different types of hydrocarbons. And it will become biofuel if the starting material is biomass, but Fischer-Tropsch and biomass to liquid production is running, and traditionally it's using either coal, that's a solid carbon source, a bit similar to biomass, or it's using gases like natural gas, or it could use biogas in principle. So depending on which source of carbon it's using, so it can be called cold to liquid or gas to liquid, and gas has been a natural gas, but there is no limitation. It could also be biogas. And I remember these examples already from 20 years back. And again, I tried to search for really this biomass to liquid production facilities, and I couldn't find those at the moment. But Sasol, so it's South African oil company. So that's known for they have been using their fossil-based reserves to make fuels with this Fischer-Tropsch technology. And the primary reason was the same as with Germans in the Second World War, that they couldn't get access to different reasons, but they didn't have access to crude oil. So they had to find other sources for hydrocarbons, and the Fischer-Tropsch process was good for that. So Sasol, South Africa, has been using this technology quite a lot. I'm not aware, I couldn't find out if they are converting it more towards biomass instead of coal or natural gas. Also, this Shell's Malaysia plant, I have known already for ages that it's been utilizing this technology. But basically, this is more like a technology-driven approach. So these products from this process can vary, and those can be tailored to petrol or diesel or more or less whatever hydrocarbon product qualities. So it's a versatile, but it has been more expensive compared to processing of crude oil or oil refinery process. Then the last or second last category of fuel components is the synthetic hydrocarbons. And just to keep in mind that this is the latest addition to the wide spectrum of products and processes. And at least I haven't heard that there would be any commercial products available. What I have heard and seen reports about, there are research and development projects around these technologies, and there are some pilot projects. For example, in Finland, it was recently in news several times that this state technology development company VTT was running a pilot project where they used captured carbon dioxide and hydrolysis, electrolyzed water-based hydrogen as starting materials to make synthetic hydrocarbons. The applications would be clearly these so-called drop-in fuels. So one can tailor and fine-tune the production so that you can make similar hydrocarbons that you find in diesel, that you find in petrol or gasoline, or kerosene, or these common hydrocarbon fuels that are used today. The most or last, if I remember correct, is the so-called bio oil that we didn't discuss much on Monday, but it's made through pyrolysis. So it's basically breaking the biomass in the absence of oxygen at higher temperatures, so that the biomass polymeric matrices and chains break into shorter chain hydrocarbons. And the bio oil is quite complicated mixture or pyrolysis oil. So I just copied some kind of composition from one of the textbooks that I used. So there's plenty of water. So water has dissolved in it. The reason why water can like to be in pyrolysis oil is that there are these aldehydes, ketones, acids, alcohols and such, which are partially water soluble. So water can easily dissolve slightly to this pyrolysis oil. Also chemically, it's a mixture of quite many types of molecules, which all are not very good fuel components. So this is mixture of this and that. And in Finland, there was a pilot production plant for bio-oils some 10 years ago already running. They used it mostly for replacing fuel oils so that those could be used in produce heat and sometimes heat and electricity, so combined heat and electricity plants. But the quality of the pyrolysis oil is not very good. So like said, so you can burn it, it produces energy, but as such, it's really not for any vehicles or traffic applications. So this could be used as a raw material in oil refinery, for example, and it will be refined and improved or used as a starting material there, but it requires many refining and purification steps before it could be a diesel or petrol ingredient or component.
Sorry?
Yeah.
When you say it cannot be used in car, like in transportation, is it because the engines cannot work with it, or it's because of CO2 and pollutions?
This composition of chemicals, so it's not suitable for the engines, I would say. So it's not high quality enough for petrol or diesel engines. There is too many components that are not suitable for the car. So it's not because of the CO2 emissions, but it's simply not. Petrol or diesel engines require certain properties or qualities, and this doesn't as such have it, so it requires improvement before it can be used.
Words. Thank you.
So this is not an exhaustive or complete collection of benefits and disadvantages and properties, but few highlights or few things regarding biofuel properties and what's some which are beneficial, some that are not so good properties in those. Keep in mind that we already mentioned this as different standards. So typically fuels that are used at least commercially, so have to, or they have certain standards and quality requirements. And the idea is that the commercially sold fuels fulfill those criteria, so that the vehicles all around the world or throughout Europe can use the same fuels without problems, without worrying that the engine will break or some other problems will emerge. But I will not go through these standards. These are just certain different level benefits and disadvantages. In Europe, we have own standards which are similar in terms of content. There are also American or North American standards, which, like these European and North American standards, are quite similar. Then some other countries have developed some also their own standards, but at least in some 10-20 years ago, so quite many countries were just adopting or using the American or European standards, like for their own production or their local conditions. This slide, the left-hand side, I showed you already. I don't know if you remember, but thinking about the fuel composition, and properties. So there are different types of fuels, and very few are like this pure something. So like we have mentioned already or seen multiple times, so there is often it's so that there are these fossil components that originate from crude oil or natural gas and so on, and these traditional fuels, most of them are these complex mixtures of it's actually the composition is seldom like known. So there are different chemicals in them. It's just this certain qualities are tailored so that they meet the quality requirements, but the mixtures contain like the energy component and then often additives that improve some properties like the storage ability or combustion properties or for example engine lubrication or many things. So this is typical for fuels. So it's a lot of components mixed together, and it has certain criteria and parameters that are fulfilled, which are set in these standards or quality requirements. Single component fuels, so those in theory can be renewable or fossil based, but there aren't very many in commercial use. So one can, for example, as an example, one can use 100% methanol or ethanol in some applications, but that's not that common. So these often are added as to dilute the fossil content of the modern fuels. So that's the current way of doing it. So you dilute the fossil petrol with certain amount of renewable ethanol. You dilute the fossil diesel with certain few volume percent of FAME fatty acid methyl ester. You can also use the pure bio-based fuels as this HVO, but keep in mind that this HVO is a mixture of different hydrocarbons. It's not a single component fuel, so there is like a fundamental difference. But this yellow box I just put here to if you can think or figure out, you don't need to answer. We don't need to go that through in detail. But now that we have been going on covering different biofuel alternatives, so if you think how to put those into these categories, so single component fuels or biocomponent blending agents or perhaps pure bio-based fuels. So maybe you can have for each category certain alternatives. This we have already glanced through, but just like thinking about the fuel benefits and disadvantages, so there are quite many like dimensions also in here. So it can be like related to availability or economy, and clearly there are these environmental greenhouse gas emission aspects and so on, but also there are this availability of that starting material and sustainability of the production chain, production process. Technology wise, some Some starting materials are more challenging, more demanding, also more costly. And then there is the policy part. So there's a lot of legislation, regulations, standards, and things that you have to take into consideration, and it's not that easy always. Here are a few properties of bio or diesel. So I think it's now that here are these two terms, so renewable diesel and biodiesel. We covered this already. So biodiesel is that fatty acid methyl ester. It's in many aspects poorer quality fuel than the renewable diesel. And there aren't columns for the fossil-based diesel, but it's in terms of storage capacity and energy content, so it's comparable to the renewable diesel, I would say. So one thing with the diesel fuel is that it's not like petrol, that regular petrol, if you store it for a half a year, so it doesn't work. There are these components that evaporate and the composition degrades, and it doesn't work so well anymore for longer periods of time. But diesel fuels have very long storage times, so they don't degrade so easily. And fossil and renewable diesels, so the storage time can be many months and years. And if you think about the property of this FAME biodiesel, I mentioned a few times already that the problem is that it's not very stable because of this impurities, biocomponents it has. So it's kind of a bioactive. So if it gets into contact with microbes, with water, so it starts to decompose, or it starts to react and change the composition. That doesn't happen with the renewable or fossil based diesel, and therefore it's mentioned that this storage stability or storage time is very, very short for biodiesel. That's evident drawback. And second, which is related to the short storage time, is also that biodiesel is to some extent hygroscopic. That means that it absorbs water from humidity from the air, and the water concentration increases in that. And that promotes these unwanted bioprocesses and degradation reactions and things like that take place there. Also, the cetane number, the better diesel, the higher the cetane number. So renewable and fossil-based diesels have very high cetane number, biodiesel doesn't. So advantages of fossil or renewable diesel, so easier handling, easier distribution, and also longer storage times. Here are then some other properties that were not taken into account. So what this FAME or biodiesel was in this table, the lower quality one, but it has potential. It can be made from, let's say, waste materials, not only from the edible oils, but recycled fats, recycled grease, animal fats, and waste oils, and such kind of things. It's to some extent it's non-toxic and biodegradable. This biodegradable can also be disadvantaged, like discussed just a while ago. But on one hand, if you get spills into the environment, so it disappears by time quite quickly and doesn't cause this pollution problem as would fossil or renewable diesel. This is from the course book, just to confuse you with certain numbers. So there's a lot of information about biodiesel in those articles, our text, course book, and literature. So this is just that the biodiesel and biodiesel are not necessarily the same. So there is the oil component coming from different oil producing plants, plenty of different alternatives. So of course one can use pure coconut oil or pure olive oil, or you can mix these. So you can use a mixture to complicate things. And the ester component, typically it's methyl ester, so that comes from methanol, which is the cheapest alcohol. But you can use other alcohols. So if you use ethyl or propyl or something, so you can of course fine tune the properties of this particular diesel as well. And here you see some differences in cloud point, flash point, so certain properties also within the biodiesel itself. So there's can be a lot of variation. And the diesel sold in the gasoline or pumps or gasoline stations, so it can also vary in purposely, like in Finland we have different composition for winter, intermediate, and for summer diesel. So for example, the cloud points and so on can vary. Here are some other characteristics of biodiesel. I don't know if some of what would be worthwhile to comment. Sulfur content is quite low. Maybe that is something that, like fossil or crude oil contains quite a lot of sulfur, and it's an extra step in the production process to remove that. But for some, like these vegetable oils, they are not. They are by nature low in sulfur content, which of course improves the SOx, sulfur oxide emissions, without any purification steps. This we already perhaps talked. So the biodiesel, so it offers these emission reductions. So CO2 and other pollutants have lower levels in the biodiesel. It is quite low, old, 22-year-old data set, but compared to fossil diesel, which is this 0% here. So when the biodiesel components are added, so hydrocarbon, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter emissions are decreasing. There is a slight increase in NOx with increasing biodiesel concentration. But that also we discussed earlier based on the life cycle assessments that there were multiple studies with different biofuels that the bio ingredient decreases emissions, carbon dioxide emissions as well. This is some data regarding the greenhouse gas emissions with different fuels. I think we don't need to go through this in detail. Here is data with pure biodiesel, so B100, and then the blend with B20, and then the fossil diesel. And I think in more or less all categories, the bio alternative reduces the emissions. Here, perhaps like it was also here, so with NOx, it can be slightly increased. However, I don't know, there is a huge difference here in NOx with pure biodiesel and then the blend. And I don't know if it's correct, this data. But CO2 emissions, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, sulfates, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and unburned hydrocarbons are also reduced. I think we covered already these things so that I don't need to repeat. It's more maybe the same thing. Here are these standard numbers, standard in EU. So it usually starts with EN, and the American one is ASTM, and then some standard number. So from that you'll identify the EU or American made standards for different whatever things. Last, some properties of bioethanol. So this table again is from the course book, and there are some aspects related to bioethanol production. You'll see here at least interesting things like differences depending on the starting material. So the common ones are presented here. So the corn grain and corn stover, that's lignocellulosic material, and sugarcane. So there are differences depending on which raw material you use. I think we will not go into details in the here, but you'll see that there are some estimates also like related about the production and the process conversion step, transportation and production steps and so on. But the process thermal efficiency and life cycle thermal efficiencies are at least positive. So if I interpret this correctly, so there is a net energy gain while making these fuel products. So in the early days, there were concerns that particularly for bioethanol, so all these production, transport, conversion steps in total would require more energy than the end product contains, and that's of course completely crazy to do fuels which are like which don't when you don't gain any net energy in making that product. But that's not the case, and so on. But just a reminder from the past that there were concerns regarding this. Advantages of bioethanol, so it improves the octane number, broader flammability limits, higher flame speeds, higher heats of vaporization, higher compression ratio, and shorter burn time. Of course, these are properties that are beneficial, but these are maybe not clear to me, not maybe clear to you all of what is the significance, what it actually means. But I took this from an article, and there is also, with respect in connection to the same, there are these disadvantages of bioethanol. So on one hand, it has slightly lower energy density compared to gasoline or petrol. So if you put 1 liter of ethanol in the car's tank or 1 liter of gasoline into the tank, so you run longer, you have higher mileage with that gasoline, so ethanol will not take you so far. So that means in practice, same volume but lower mileage.
How much different?
I think it's somewhere in the course book written. I don't know if I say that some 15% less, lower or something like that. That could be okay. 15-20% lower energy density. Then bioethanol has it's corrosive, and that's maybe something that comes as a surprise if you think about alcohol beverages, ethanol, the ingredients, so that it would corrode. It's not corroding in similar way as acids like sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid or something that is highly corrosive, but this is more corrosive than the normal hydrocarbons used in fossil fuel or fossil-based petrol. And at least I remember the problem here that if you use very old petrol engines, like engines on the boat or in some historic cars, like let's say cars from 70s or 50s, so there the fuel lines, the pump membranes and the hoses and tubing are designed for fossil-based hydrocarbons, and if you add there like 5 volume% or 10-15 volume% of ethanol in it, so the ethanol component starts to dissolve these polymeric, let's say, tubing and maybe some membranes used in these old-fashioned pumps and so on, and it causes leakages and so on. So it is corrosive to those materials that were in the old days designed to work in the absence of this ethanol. The corrosiveness applies also to methanol to some extent. It can be even worse. Lower vapor pressure for ethanol compared to gasoline. So in Finland, it's quite clear if you start gasoline engine which runs with bioethanol at very low or very high low temperatures like -20 or -30, so the engine might not start because of there is not high enough vapor pressure in the cylinder for that gas ethanol air mixture to ignite. And this becomes problem also this in a similar way that with a biodiesel, the FAME, which was miscible with water or hygroscopic. So with ethanol also this hygroscopicity is a problem. So ethanol and water will mix in all sorts of proportions. So if you have ethanol in gasoline and you have a contact with humid air, so some of that water will dissolve into that fuel, and it might cause problems, not necessarily. This is, I would say, toxicity to ecosystems. So I think if you compare to gasoline or diesel, so I think I'm not aware that ethanol would be any worse in terms of toxicity, but of course it's not something that you are supposed to pour into the nature. Here are some properties of bioethanol. I think this just for your information. There's nothing that special.
Sorry, I have a question. I think you said it before, but how is bioethanol produced?
Sorry, did I hear that? How is bioethanol produced? There are basically two routes or processes. So one is the traditional fermentation of sugar-containing starting material. So you squeeze the sugars out from whatever sugar producing plants. So sugar cane, beet, what's this called? This, well, now I don't get the English word for it. But in any case, so if you make a regular table sugar or glucose, so you need that and water and some baker's yeast, and you ferment it in a very similar way like alcoholic beverages are made. So it can be made from those sugar-containing materials, or it can be made from grain, or so this is by fermentation. And then is the second generation bioethanol is made from lignocellulosic, so like sawdust or wood-containing material. And there, the important step is first to break the biopolymers, so cellulose, into monomeric units, and those are glucose sugar. And then after that, once you have broken the lignocellulosic material into sugars, so then it's the same fermentation like with regular sugar, but the starting point is very different. So from sawdust or from table sugar. I had with students, we had course called liquid biofuels quite many years, and we had a lab exercise where we when we started to make bioethanol from this paper tissue. So we took a pile of paper tissue, broke it with sulfuric acid into monomer glucose. Then we fermented that water sugar mixture, and after fermentation we distilled it, and we got this kind of concentrated alcohol out from basically waste paper or paper tissue. So this describes in a small scale or in lab scale application how you can make ethanol from this lignocellulosic wood-based material. So those two processes are this like generally applied.
Very clear, thank you.
I have some overlapping in the materials. I think this blending is quite clear already. So ethanol is a lot used as a blending agent or bioadditive, and I will not say focus on these more. Okay, this is more or less the last slide. This is something that I took from a, I think, previous or last week's slide as well. So now that we have covered, like, to some extent the properties of, or went through different biofuel alternatives, and there some things about the sustainability and their properties and also applications. So just good to remember that there are, here it's listed 5 properties, but like what fuels is used and what is maybe the best. So there are lots of things that play a role. So these are just some of the few or important ones. It's transporting like that fuel. So how easy or how difficult it is to transport, and very often the liquid fuels, materials that are liquid at more or less room temperature, or these regular environmental temperatures, are the easiest to transport. Also liquids are easiest to store. Gaseous materials require very tight, often pressurized tanks so that you keep it there. But for liquid, you need a very simple canister or container, and it can be safely stored. Then for fuels are flammable, and some air to fuel mixtures often are explosive. So there are many safety issues, and for certain applications, certain fuels are not suitable because of safety. Another property what we covered to some extent is the energy density. So some fuels have lower energy density, and it might make it difficult, or the use quite difficult. So you of course commonly want a high energy density so that your fuel tank is small but you have long mileage. But especially with the gaseous fuels, gaseous biofuels, biogas or biohydrogen, so this energy density or the energy density per liter can be a challenge. Then we have mentioned this drop-in fuels multiple times. So not only the transport, but also the infra for distribution is something to consider. So it's quite important that the fuels that we produce, so they fit or those could be easily provided to the customers or to the users. And if the biocomponent simply fits the existing infra, existing tanks or distribution lines, so it makes it very easy to enter the market. But if you have to develop totally from scratch, totally new distribution system, like at the moment, the situation with hydrogen, so there's a quite high threshold for the commercial application, and it's this kind of chicken and egg problem. So if you don't have hydrogen fuel available, so you will not buy hydrogen driven gas, and the other way around. So hydrogen driven car, and if you don't buy them, so nobody will manufacture them or sell them, and if there aren't cars available, so nobody is interested in developing the infrastructure around it. So therefore this, let's say, recipe for success is that if you can utilize this drop-in fuels and the existing infra, so that's a huge benefit compared to totally new products. Also the applications, so if we talk about the highest potential of biofuels, even in the long run, in the next 10-20 years, it's probably, it was mentioned that the aviation industry is very difficult, or they are stuck to this jet fuel and kerosene, and those cannot be easily replaced by some battery technologies or some other technologies. So they still require liquid fuels for a long time. And for example, Neste, the Finnish oil company that has this HVO renewable diesel, so they also have renewable jet fuels. So that is one area. So air transport, also the heavy vehicles like trucks that are transporting goods and products throughout Europe. So there, the electricity-based applications are still not viable, and there this liquid renewable fuels are long going to be used. Where the liquid fuels and biofuels and fossil fuels are more easily replaced are this, let's say, common conventional heating of houses and so on, also producing power and energy. So there are good alternative solutions available. So maybe the main focus with liquid or biofuels is liquid biofuels, and especially in this transportation sector. So not so much in passenger cars, but in larger vehicles, heavier trucks, airplanes, and so on. I think that was probably all for today. So in short, we addressed slightly the sustainability pluses and minuses related to biofuels, went through few applications for these biofuels, and also went through some of the properties and pluses and minuses related to their use, and that's, I think, all for today.